We have so much farmland here, and I looked up a statistic on the city of Richmond the other day, and I think we're only using approximately 33% of our farmland, compared to Delta using 81%. Well, farming, the number of farms that we have has been steadily decreasing over the last few years. In the last year, there was a statistic produced by the city of Richmond that shows that we had a net loss of 50 farms.
What has happened with the mansions moving out of farmland? We have non-farm people now controlling our food-producing land, and in such a way that they are not putting into production to produce vegetables that we need. We produce 43% of our vegetables in BC. The Ministry of Agriculture suggests that because of what's happening in California, that we need to be producing close to 100%, which means we need an extra couple 100,000 acres of land. Instead of that, we're taking the land out of agriculture, building the mansions, planting blueberries, exporting the blueberries because people don't want that much blueberries, simply so that some very wealthy people can have these huge mansions on farmland. They can't build elsewhere in the cities because there isn't enough room for them to build the mansions. So we're getting it all the way through BC. 1.1% of British Columbia can grow vegetables, and that's the land they're building on. I was chair of the Agriculture Committee at Metro Vancouver in 2006 to 2012, and we asked the provincial government this question, is how do we stop alienating the farmland with all these big houses? And they brought in guidelines setting the maximum house size for farmland to be the same size as the biggest house you can build in a subdivision. Now, you can see some of those big houses behind me here, the ones at the other side of our fence, are the biggest house you can possibly build in a regular subdivision, and they're big. And we've had a study done, the largest house size should be around 4,200 square feet. Instead, that council has approved houses of 10,700 square feet. And what that does, if you can build a house 3 times as big, then it has 3 times the value. And when you add the 3 times the value onto the farm, it means the cost of the farm is so high that anybody who wants to go farming can't afford it.
All of those small farms are turned into estates. That's all going. Even just 2 years ago, you could get farms for $500,000 an acre, which is a lot, but for a small scale farm, so you could get a 4 or 5 acre farm for $2 million. So even just a couple of years ago, you were able to sell some assets that you have, borrow a little bit, and purchase some farmland. And that would be an entry-level farm. And now prices have skyrocketed to over $1 million an acre. There's a property over on Gilbert Road that's 10 acres and it's selling for $10 million. So even the larger farms are going up to $1 million an acre for farmland. Once the mansion permit is applied for, it's heading up to $2 million an acre. Like there was a 5-acre blueberry farm on Number 6 Road that they purchased for $2 million, and they got a permit for a mansion. The older home that's on the property was being rented out to a family. It's got farm status. They got a permit for a mansion, and they immediately listed it for sale for almost $8 million. So that's $1.6 million per acre for blueberries, which don't make it any money per acre compared to a vegetable farm. It's definitely impossible at this point for most people, anybody who wants to get into farming, to purchase farmland in Richmond. This here is a 5-acre vegetable farm, which is beautiful. And these are full-time farmers. They make their living off of 5 acres. And this is like a belt that starts here of East Richmond, where it's all really productive farmland. But here next door, this 5-acre property, it's changed hands a number of times. So right now it's a company that owns it, and before this company it was a numbered company. And so back in around 2012, I found out from the people in the area here that they were running it as a construction dumping site. So they were bringing in contaminated waste and gravel, and they actually stripped away all of the topsoil, all of the farmable soil, and piled it up in big piles at the front of the property, and they sold it. They were selling the soil, which is against the law as well. And so basically this entire 5 acres is, there's no farmable soil left. Rumor has it that when the old house was demolished, that they actually buried the house in the back as well. So, and that was never remediated. So there's a house buried underground back there. And you can see how high it is, like how high it is compared to the field down here. So it's not arable land anymore, property. And apparently, even with all the stop work orders and order for remediation to happen, apparently not a single load of construction waste has ever been remediated off of this property. And actually, when that stuff was brought in, it affected the drainage. It affected this farm, and it affected the one next door, where it flooded the field completely, and so they lost their farm status. And then the taxes go through the roof, and now these people that own it now received a permit for a mansion, and it's going to be over 11,000 square feet because they applied before the new rules as well, but I think it's between 11 and 14,000 square feet is what it said in the real estate ad. So they bought it from the numbered company for $2.2 million and got a permit for a mansion, and we're selling it for $5.5 million. And but this house is going to be a lot higher than the surrounding houses, and it's going to be huge, and it's going to completely change the farming viability of this neighborhood, because it's going to create all the land values to rise up so much that nobody's going to buy a property like this to farm it, because it'll just cost way too much money to purchase farmland. I mean, we've seen finished mansions on properties like this sell for up to $18 million. I think this one's just an example of the abuse that happens when there's speculation on farmland, when people are interested in what they can get from farmland by running it as an illegal dump site, or by building a mansion and immediately listing it for sale to make $3 million in 1 year, simply because of the ability to build a mansion. You know, this property's done for. We're setting up a system where people can abuse it, and then we're relying on enforcement to solve the problem.
Tell on your neighbors.
Right? And so yeah, we're supposed to be spying on all the mansions to make sure they're not casinos, and we're supposed to be spying on all the additional dwellings to make sure it's not family living in there or whatever, you know, and make sure they're not doing something illegal. And instead of just preserving a farming viable system by setting the proper house size limit, which will ensure that farmers live on the land and not speculators, which, you know, generally if a farmer's living on the land, they're going to treat it properly because their money is in their crops. They have a vested interest in keeping the farm viable and the soil healthy. This is basically where the mansions started and where that was centralized, and that was because I was reading an article from 2016 that explains that there was a new market opening up for exporting blueberries to China. And there was trade negotiations and an anticipation of a large export deal starting up, which brought in a lot of foreign investment. So a lot of foreign investors were coming in, a lot of so mansions were getting built on properties, were getting bought, developed into mansions and sold to foreign investors who really liked the large houses, and also then blueberries would just get planted in the back, which is part of the or leased out, and so the blueberry exporters are farming all of these properties. So it kind of was part of the blueberry. It's part of the blueberry industry, is getting the foreign investment, building the mansion as part of it, and then waiting for these trade deals to go through, which I believe they now have. And so what the article explained is that it created a real estate bubble, which was subsequent with a drop in the price of blueberries because there was a surplus in the market of blueberries, because the trade hadn't opened up yet. So there was a surplus in the blueberries. The blueberry prices dropped by half, and so the mansion industry kind of took on a life of its own. And so it kind of became more about the mansions than about the blueberries, right? And I can see what the blueberry farmers are saying in that in their business, it actually brings some fields back into production, because a lot of smaller farms and whatnot, all along Blundell and all around, were purchased on fields that were no longer being farmed, but they weren't farmed for years. And so they got the foreign investment to come in and purchase the property, build a nice house for the foreign investors to live in, and planted blueberries in the back and brought those fields back into production. So I can see in their mind it doesn't harm farming at all, because for their type of farming, that was reliant on the foreign investment, because it is a very low maintenance crop. So it's a good arrangement, right? So I can see why it doesn't affect blueberry farming negatively and how it's totally justifiable. But what's happened is that real estate bubble has spread, and so now the foreign investors are just purchasing any farmland and building mansions. And so it's not just the blueberry farms anymore, it's the small vegetable farms, and it's the small farms that could be a small scale vegetable farm for a farmer to live on, and it's spreading down to the clay zones down at number 2 road where I showed you, and number 3 road and Gilbert Road, and this is also a belt of clay vegetable farming all along here. So it's the real estate bubble of farmland has sort of popped and exploded all over Richmond, and it is damaging. Over in East Richmond, you have a lot more peat soil, so it's more class 3, 4 to 6, and it's ideal. It's acidic, and it's ideal for growing berries.
The reason they're planted in blueberries is that it's the easiest thing to grow. You don't have to do any work once they're planted, and you can contract it out to somebody else. If you farm it yourself, you have to make $2,500, but if you don't farm it yourself, the farmer pays you $1 to lease the land, and he'll farm it for you, and you can get the farm taxes. That's the real scam. And what happens is, well, you'll find there's an ad by one of the local realtors in the paper a year or two ago, offering a property for sale along Westminster Highway. In the ad, he said, you buy the land, build your dream home, and we will farm the land for you. And that's what happens. And so you find out, I call them realtor farmers. They will either do the farming themselves or have somebody paid to do the farming, or they have a bona fide farmer that they know about that will farm the land. And effectively you get to have your mansion, and you have your blueberry fields around the mansion, and somebody else does the work. You qualify as a farm, and you get farm taxes.
Well, if you're making only $10,000 a year on your blueberry crop, you can't really afford farm workers, and you are not even making enough money on the farm to sustain that land as a viable farm. So even though if you have 2 acres or 5 acres, whatever the case may be, you could easily make $100,000 if you're dedicated and you're growing something other than a cash crop like blueberries, which is, quick in, quick out. You hire some pickers for a couple of weeks, and then it's all done.
We moved here in '88 and been farming blueberries ever since, and specifically on this property since 2001. Which was not in production. We revitalized this whole farm and brought it into production into a high-yielding blueberry farm. It's a year-round job because in the time that you're not yielding or cropping the blueberries, you're prepping for the next season. So you're looking at fertilizing, disease control, spraying, and pruning, which takes a long period of time. So it is a year-round operation. It's just that in the fall, winter, it's a little bit slower, and in the spring, summer, right now, it's pretty much full time.
Unless you're 100, 200 acres or something like that you can make a living. It's just unfortunate part is the prices aren't where it should be, and that's from not having a control, a board where they can kind of control the quota. And Richmond is a little bit unique in that sense. We have a lot of smaller parcels, and that's why a lot of these people, it's very difficult for them to be a full-time farmer, because if you're dealing on a 5 acres or 10 acres, in some cases there's 2 acres to majority of the are 2 acres between 5 acres. So what kind of yield are you going to get out of there? And I think the good thing is people are actually farming. That's the thing that I found in my 30 years in the business. The people that I'm selling these properties to, they are, just like Ben said, this property here, they are bringing these lands back into production. We're happy with what's happened there, because every time we've gone in front of the council, the farmers have come out and explained their stories, explained them why they need, the size-wise. And in the last go-round, we were able to maintain what we compromised last year. Yeah. So we're glad that we would like to move forward and resolve these issues with illegal uses. If somebody's renting these rooms for $400, $300 a night, that's what we want to stop. I'm not happy about these things. Any of the farmers aren't happy about what's going on, because we're getting dragged into all this by some, few bad apples that have come in and, done this. The other thing you also look at is a lot of the farmland is sitting idle between number 4 and 5 road, because that's 1 acre parcels, and nobody goes out there to lease those lands. If somebody wants to farm in Richmond, like I think it was Mr. May has said, Richmond has the youngest farming community because people can afford to lease these lands, whereas let's say foreign buyers bought it and they don't. I get calls from everybody that say, you know what, if you have somebody that wants to lease my land, I'd be more than happy to. The average price for an acre is about $200 to $250 an acre a year, where somebody can go lease this land and work. So the question is, the land is available, but do they want to do it? If the buyer is using this home for other than residential use, this is where I have an issue with the city. City can enforce their bylaws if it's being run as an Airbnb or if it's a gaming den. Why are we not enforcing these bylaws that we have in place instead of looking the other way? Here, unfortunately, what we've basically done is we've encouraged these people to come and build because we didn't stop the first one or the second one or the third one. So I think what we need to do is work together, as a community as a whole, and come to a solution.
From my understanding, there's international treaties involved, and why that 20% is not involved on farmland, because farmland is essentially, it's not, even though we reside on the property, it is a place to do business. It is not the same as living in the city. It's not a RS1 zoned house where it's just a residential use. There's a mixed use for the property here. But you also have to look at the foreign investor on the other side of this ESA property here. That was a foreign investor that bought that property, brought it back into production. If you look into the back, he's planted a whole new farm. If you drive by, you'll see that property, as long as I've lived here, has never been farmed. If you go to the number 6 road, there's multiple properties that sat idle with the people have grown old, children left the home, farmland side idle. I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars invested in this property. Their blueberry fields left idle, increased disease pressure on my new plants, and they can't do nothing about it because they were not capable of doing it. Now new people have invested money into it, revitalized the property, planted new plants, and they're actually taking care of it. It makes me happy to see that because it's costing me less money and it's better for everybody buying my fruit because I have to spray less. So it's actually revitalizing this whole area. There's a lot more farming happening now than what I've seen in the last 20 years. It's one thing what the media says, and to actually be at ground zero and seeing the farming happen, knowing the properties. Now this, I'm not going to get into exact numbers. This costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to get going, and it takes 8 years to get blueberries into maturity and to grow and to make a decent income out of. We grow what grows really well here. Blueberries thrive, but I think Richmond is probably the best tasting blueberries in the world. Why? Because the soil supports blueberry growth. It's high acidity, very low pH, and it thrives. And the other thing is look at the cost of investments. That's just a plant. That's not including equipment. The equipment is very specialized for each type of farming. So it's very easy for somebody to say, oh, blueberries aren't profitable, get rid of them, go plant vegetables. It's not that simple, because just to retool, purchase all the machinery to do the vegetable growing is another hundreds of thousands of dollars, right?
The issues that I've had here in the farming community, I would like to have the general public come walk on Sidaway, walk on number 6 road, see how safe it is. You dare not to walk, we dare not to walk on our streets, even during the daytime or nighttime for a family walk or something, because we don't have these services here. So these are the things that the farmers, are they yelling and screaming at the City Hall? No. They're doing the best they can. They're busy at work at farm. And the other thing is they don't have access to the local papers. It doesn't come in here. City doesn't send anything to these farmers to keep them informed. It's only where people like myself that go out and tell the farmer, hey, this is what's happening. Your rights are being violated because city goes and wants to change bylaws without consultation. So I also do want to commend you, Kerry, for taking this initiative and spending your time and effort to bring this issue so where we can all sit down and discuss it and have a united Richmond where everybody has a voice, everybody has equal rights, and community flourish, lives to know our neighbors and see why does my neighbor do certain things, and that's the whole idea of opening up doors and having a vibrant community rather than a divided community.
Yes.
Because we don't want our politicians to divide and conquer. We want our community.
We want to thrive. We want to see everybody together. On the weekends, we'd love to see city residents come out and buy fruit from us and pick blueberries in our fields and say, and walk around and have everybody inclusive, not exclusive. Canada is an inclusive place. We are multicultural. Your face, Girdial's face, everybody, we're all Canadians. So, by having discussion like this, I wanted to say thank you also for bringing it to light and bringing the community together.